Welcome everyone. In this presentation, I want to just kind of provide a little bit more review on the lesson plans. I've been getting several questions in regards to the lesson plans, and I want to make sure that everyone's on the right track and completing the lesson plans properly. Some of the ones that I have reviewed are not necessarily following the expectations, so hopefully this will give you a better idea of what I'm looking for. First of all, I know we've discussed the differences between using bulleted points and paragraph form. If you use paragraph form especially, and even if you use bulleted points, always use complete sentences. Think through the process completely. I do want you to demonstrate quality work. I do want you to demonstrate kind of this upper level expectation of thinking and writing. So be sure that you write out exactly what you want your reader to understand. Also, when you identify your goals and objectives, it can be that you have one goal but several objectives, and you may have multiple goals as well. But be sure you identify these separately, individually, and clearly. List exactly what you want the students to be able to do. Remember, always start these statements with the student will be able to. This helps you to focus your goals and objectives on students. Also, keep in mind the alignment that I spoke about before. Everything from the standard that you choose to the grade level being developmentally appropriate, the activities that you conduct throughout your introductory process, as well as the fitness component. There have been some that I looked at that are identified at the kindergarten level, but in the warm-ups or the introductory activity, there are several different warm-ups. There's jumping jacks, there's push-ups, there's jogging of a lap, a lot of things that you would not necessarily have your kindergartners do. So think about the alignment all the way from the beginning to end, making sure that each step that you take is focused on the grade level that you are intended for. And then with the introductory and the fitness component, be sure that this is stated explicitly. Once again, these can be combined. It doesn't necessarily have to be a separate component for the introduction and then a separate component for the fitness. They can be combined, but be sure that you clearly identify exactly what you're looking for and what you plan or what you're hoping to address within that fitness component. And then with the lesson focus, the main thing here is explaining exactly what and how you're going to teach, and we'll talk about this again. And overall, just be creative, be thoughtful, be clear, be articulate, and make sure that you're writing this from the point of view that you're hoping someone who has no knowledge of physical education can be able to pick up your lesson plan and teach the lesson with the same level and success that you would do it if you were teaching it. Okay, now quickly to go over the lesson plan format. I've had this posted in Moodle for you, and all you need to do is just kind of plug in the information here. I know I mentioned that you don't have to do this, but it makes it a little bit easier for you. You have the instructional unit information at the top, and always focus on the California state standards. There have been some lesson plans that I've looked at that are focusing on the national standards, but we're breaking it down to the state level. So focus on the California state standard and write out completely what the standard is. Do not just use the number of the standard or the substandard. Write both out. The overarching standard, the main standard, there's 5 of those, and then the substandard, which there's several of them. And then as I mentioned before, the goals and objectives, be sure those are separately stated. So you have your goal, the student will be able to, and you have your objective, the student will be able to. So be sure those are clear. And then we have your assessment strategy. Here, you're only going to list the type of assessment that you plan to use. And this must be included in your lesson plan because it needs to be understood exactly how you plan to check for your understanding and to determine whether or not the students have met the expectations. So you can simply list either structured observation, but be sure that you understand what that is. You can list rubric, checklist, journal, or some of the other forms of assessment that we've discussed. And keep in mind that you're only listing this, but I do want you to understand that whatever assessment strategy that you select, be sure, again, it's aligned to the overall lesson plan. So for example, if you are creating a kind of a formal lesson plan, or let's say a summative lesson plan, so at the end of a particular unit, you wouldn't simply do a structured observation because you want to make sure that the students understand everything that you have taught them throughout the entire unit. So you may want to include a rubric or something like that. So think about the alignment of those as well. And then with your teaching strategies, I know we mentioned that we haven't necessarily gone over these, but please review chapter 3 to understand what learning styles are and the type of teaching strategies that you can use. There's the direct, the task, the mastery, individualized, cooperative, inquiry, guided discovery, and there's some more. So be sure you understand what those are. And then, of course, the equipment and materials needed, as I mentioned before, be sure you list those out completely. And then the next section is the learning environment, which I just covered already, so be sure that you understand that. With the 4 parts of the lesson, this is the core of your lesson. These are the things that I'm really looking for. Within that introductory statement, I want you to be able to explain how you're going to introduce the concepts that you plan to teach during that lesson. An introductory component is more than just a warm-up, although that is part of it. The introductory area explains to the students or prepares them for the actual lesson, for the actual learning that's going to take place. So be sure that you're clear in explaining what you plan to do. How are you going to introduce the concepts that you are going to teach? And then within that physical fitness component, these need to be explicitly stated. So think about those 5 areas of fitness that we discussed in class. Which one are you planning to address or incorporate in your lesson plan? Be sure that this is clear in your lesson plan. So simply state if you're doing some type of cardiovascular warm-up activity, state that you are addressing the cardiovascular component of physical fitness. And then with the lesson focus, as I mentioned before, this is probably the most important part of your lesson plan, and it requires the most attention and the most detail. Basically here, what I'm really looking for is for you to demonstrate what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it. Sometimes it helps to write completely everything that you plan to do, all the steps that you plan to take and why you plan to take those. So what are you doing? What are you teaching? And that's what I'm looking for, the fact that you are actually teaching the students something as opposed to just exposing them and giving them the opportunity to do something on their own. So here you should state what you're going to state, what you're going to say, state the steps that you're going to follow. It needs to be skill focused. So explain the skill that you're teaching them and how you are going to teach them. And then with your closing activity, once again, use this time to check for understanding. Use this time to find out whether or not the information that you gave the students, the part that you taught, is going to be effective, if they've retained any of that information, if they can demonstrate, if they can echo some of the things that you said throughout the class. So here with the closing activity, explain how you're checking for understanding and then how you plan to take that learning beyond the classroom. And as I mentioned before, this can only be a Q&A session. And that way you can check to see if the students have a good understanding of what you plan to do, and then you can ask them how they can apply this to something outside of class. And then if you notice that this other section that I have for a rationale for each one of those areas, I want you to think through that process. So in your lesson plans, you also need to include a rationale for each one of those 4 parts of the lessons. So after you complete your introductory component, provide a couple of sentences explaining why you are doing what you're doing. And this helps you to think through the process, to make some sense of it, to make sure that it's aligned, to make sure that it actually makes sense for the students. So what purpose does the introductory component serve? So after you explain what you plan to do in that intro part, provide a rationale for it. The same thing for the other areas. With the physical fitness, whatever it is that you're addressing within physical fitness, provide a rationale. Explain why you are doing that. And this once again helps you to clarify yourself. With the lesson focus and the closing activity, you're going to do the same thing. So be sure that these are stated clearly within your lesson plan. It shouldn't be something that's left out. Although it's just 1 point for each section, you can lose points if you don't have that in there. So be sure you have those components in there, because I'll be looking for that for your lesson plan. I've been getting a lot of lesson plans. I've been getting a lot of questions for the lesson plans. That's fine. That's great. But be sure that you are attentive to detail and really developing the lesson plan from the point of view that you are actually going to teach this, or someone else who can pick this up and run with it the same way that you would. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, keep going, and we will see you in class.